Thank you everyone for joining. So we are live today, and we've got Scott McDermott with us right now, talking about getting us ready to prep your environment for deploying Aria Suite. So a lot of good content there, some good tips and tricks. I know we got a couple of things going on with this program. First off, thanks to everybody who's been supporting us with this program. I know we've been getting a lot of views, a lot of folks coming in live, a lot of fantastic questions during our live session. So we really do encourage people to come in live and take advantage of the fact that you can get up close and personal with some of our experts with these live questions. Coming up on June 22nd, we've got getting started gaining insights into your capacity. So that's one you definitely don't want to miss. That's going to be some Aria operations content. And that's going to be with Brandon Gordon and Nico Guerra. So we're looking forward to that. Also, keep an eye out on your social media links. And in fact, we'll have a link at the end of this presentation. We've started up our archive of all of our previous sessions on the VMware Tech Zone. So if you get there and you see that the name of it is all things VMware Aria, don't be surprised, because we're actually expanding this program to include two more series of events. There's actually going to be a sort of an entry-level tips and tricks version. There's going to be this continuing program, which is going to cover more advanced users who have been using for a while and who are looking for some advice on specific things. And then we're also going to be doing a power user series. So that should be coming up hopefully before the end of the summer. We'll get that started. So a lot more content coming through. You asked, we've got it. We will absolutely make that happen for you. So with that, enough about me. Scott, let's take it away, man.
Awesome. Yeah, keeping it action-packed, Anders. Thanks for the intro. So I'm Scott McDermott. I'll be presenting about preparing your environment for deploying the VMware Aria Suite. I've been with VMware about 7 years now. Currently, I'm a staff technical marketing architect focusing on cloud automation, and have been for about 2-3 years now. And so in this session, we're going to plan for the Aria Lifecycle Suite deployment of a clustered instance of VMware Identity Manager, along with a 3-node clustered instance of Aria Automation. Also, we'll work to review some of the prerequisites to consider, like certificate management and some of the post-installation tasks, like upgrading a product certificate with an imported certificate authority signed certificate, and finally, scaling out a global environment. So, and by the end of the session, we'll completely deploy an Aria Suite Lifecycle instance. You'll know how to manage the certificates in the Aria Suite Lifecycle locker, and you'll know how to leverage OpenSSL to confirm certificates and chains are applied correctly, and use NSLookup to check DNS records. And finally, deploy a 3-node cluster of VMware Identity Manager and VMware Aria Automation. So, as part of the past few releases, we've been going through a rebranding, so I just wanted to touch real quick on that. So we've started changing our names from the vRealize Suite Lifecycle Manager at 8.10, and when it gets upgraded to 8.12, it's now being referred to as the VMware Aria Suite Lifecycle. And so as part of that, we've structured the Aria family into the 3 main categories: automation, operations, and cost. And so Aria Suite Lifecycle is a unified product and content lifecycle management tool that's organized into the following 5 sections. Lifecycle operations, where we will probably spend the majority of our time managing our various environments. Lockers, where secure assets like certificates, passwords, and licenses are stored. Identity management is where we can control common configuration and access to Workspace ONE access and leverage that across all of the Aria Suite products that are integrated with it. And content management gives us an easy-to-use interface to effectively manage content between your various environments. And finally, the marketplace provides some out-of-the-box content curated by VMware and our partners. So let's jump into lifecycle operations, since that's where we'll spend most of our time. With the Easy Installer, we've reduced the deployment time down to a couple of hours, where it used to take quite a long time with older versions of automation. And so with the lifecycle operations, we can easily manage all of our deployments and their configurations through their life cycles. And then the other area of focus we're going to look at today is the locker, mostly with the certificate management. And so those can be either generated with Aria Suite Lifecycle, or they can be imported from a certificate authority, whether it's like a DigiCert or your own internal Active Directory certificate authority. Also, the locker manages licenses, whether you've added them manually or retrieved them from an entitled My VMware account. And finally, passwords are also managed in the locker to help meet security and compliance standards. And so let's get into some of the prerequisites. Before you start your installation, one of the first things the Easy Installer is going to ask you for is some credentials to your vCenter to do your deployment. So if you'd like, we provide the documentation on creating a specific user role so that all operations coming from Aria Suite Lifecycle are using your desired service account. And you can check that out on that link there. Next, we want to ensure that the vCenter and all the clustered hosts are reachable from the Easy Installer client, along with ensuring that Aria Suite Lifecycle host that we're deploying is reachable and the routing is working between the networks. And so while it's not entirely a prerequisite, I do find it best to jot down, maybe in a notepad, my deployment details and FQDNs and the IPs that we're going to use for our cluster deployment. So, and finally, for additional information during your installer, there's the log file that's generated in your user's app data folder, assuming you're leveraging Windows. So let's take a look at a few of these notes here. And so, like I said, I just like to make a little table of what needs to be configured, and so as I'm going through the installer, it's all noted previously, and I don't have to really think too much about it, and keeps from making misconfigurations. And so next, this is a table. I just kind of quickly jotted down of all of the host names that would be needed to complete the installation. So our lifecycle host name, its IP, the virtual IP, and host name for the load balancer, along with the 3 node names for both vIDM and the Aria automation cluster. And so next, I know it's probably everyone knows about NS lookup and DNS, but you'd be surprised the number of times we need to just update DNS, or we find a typo, or maybe there's an old record that's existing that maybe didn't get cleared out previously. So I always like to just do an NS lookup on all those host names and fully qualified domain names, and make sure that only one record returns for both the forward and the reverse lookup. We should have one and only one record returned. So it's always a good thing to double check before you begin your installation. So next is just a quick view of the Easy Installer. Just a quick note, so the green dots are the completed tasks, where the next gray dot is the task that's being worked on. And so at this point in the Easy Installer, the Aria Suite Lifecycle host has been deployed, and the client machine is now copying the binaries needed to install Aria Automation and vIDM to the appliance, and the next few steps would begin that install. And so we'll see that in our upcoming demo and the action here in a moment. All right, so this is what the screen looks like once it's completed, and you can click on the links and log right into your products. And so I did want to take a minute to go through the PEM certificates and their formatting and conversions as could be needed depending on your certificate authority. And so there's just a few main keys to think about when you create a certificate and need to import it into your locker. Generally, we want to be using a 2048-bit cert with a SHA-256 signature with both server and client authentication, along with digital signature and key encipherment key usage values. along with an exportable private key. That one's actually pretty important as well. You need to be able to get your private key out and supply it in your PEM file here. And so we also need to ensure that the load balancer and all the nodes FQDNs are included in the subject alternative name field. And so on the right-hand side is kind of the structure of what a PEM certificate would look like with the, with the private key being on top there, followed by your beginning and intermediate if you have one. You may not have one. It may just be a server certificate and a root certificate, and that's fine as well. Or you may have multiple intermediates, and that's fine as well. But generally, the idea is private key up top, server certificates, any intermediates, followed by the root at the end. And maybe your certificate authority is a Microsoft domain controller, CA. And so a lot of times that cert will export as a PFX format. And we can just use OpenSSL to simply convert that, and it'll output our PEM certificate in the desired format. And we'll take a look at that in a few moments during our demo. And so the next thing as part of the demo is we want to confirm that the certificate, along with its chain, are applied to our load balancer's virtual IP properly. And so from the Lifecycle host, we'll take a look using OpenSSL to inspect the certificate chain and see that everything is included as we would expect, and that'll help make sure that we'll have a successful scale out request when the time comes. And so with that, let's go ahead and dive into the demo. Give me 1 second. All right. So here we have our easy installer mounted to our CD-ROM drive here. And like I said before, I like to just take a notepad and set up all my details here so they're available for reference as I run through the installer. So let's go ahead and browse through here and get to installer exe. All right, make this a little bigger. And let's go ahead and proceed to install here. So here is just a quick intro screen telling us about the current versions that are going to be installed. And so that would be 8.12.2 for Aria Automation, 8.12 for Aria Suite Lifecycle, and 3.3.7 for Identity Manager. And then we just go ahead and accept the license agreement. And then we'll go ahead and populate our vCenter FQDN details. And so that blue link there is the link I was showing earlier, describing the custom role if you'd like to create a role specifically, but we'll go ahead and just use administrator at vSphere.local for this demo. And all right, accept our cert. Let's go ahead and decide a deployment location, our management folder, and our compute resource management cluster, and our iSCSI data store. And I'll go ahead and set thin disk provisioning. And now we'll define our common network configuration that'll be used across all the products we're deploying today. And so we'll just provide the details once, and then when it comes to deploying the products, we just have to define the VM name and the VM's FQDN and its IP, and it'll use the rest of these values for each appliance. All right, so we got all that set, looks good. And then just like the networking configuration, a common password will be shared across the Aria Suite Lifecycle, Aria Automation, and Identity Manager accounts that are noted up there at the top. And that, of course, can be updated later through the Locker password management process. Let's set Lifecycle as our VM name and our host name, our IP here. Now, optionally, we can provide a friendly name for our data center and vCenter names here. I'm just going to leave them as default. It's just the reflective in the Aria Suite Lifecycle operations UI. And we'll take a look at that in a moment here during the once it's installed. And so if we're looking to add a bunch of additional binaries post our installation, we can proactively increase our data disk size here. But since we're just deploying these two products right now, we'll leave it as default. And if our organization did require FIPS compliance, there's a checkbox here and on the Identity Manager installation and the Aria automation installation pages. So if you need that, you can check that on, but it does lock down the appliance for some upgrades and whatnot. And so use with a bit of caution. So let's go ahead and proceed here. All right, and define our vIDM node 1 details here. And so for the default configuration admin, I like to use the username config admin. It's pretty much a default username that most of the example installs use. And then the important part, though, is to have definitely a valid email address. So if you need to do password recovery or something like that, it makes the process much easier as opposed to some manual other methods to recover that account's credentials. And again, the default node size is medium, and we have FIPS compliance turned off by default, unless you need it. Get this email in here. And so finally, let's make sure we check to sync the group members to the directory when we add the group. It's always best to have this done right away. Leaving this unchecked can result in some manual efforts that need to be done as new groups are added. So I always like to make sure that's checked. All right, so now we've reached the Aria automation environment configuration. And so since we can deploy multiple products into an environment, I'll just call this Aria Suite and put our license key. And we're going to do a cluster deployment. So let's put in the load balancer IP and host name. And for the SSL terminated at the load balancer, I did not specifically terminate set SSL termination up on the load balanced IP address there. And so I'm going to go ahead and unselect that. Most of the time, you probably don't have a termination set up. Unless so generally, that's unselected unless you specifically know you did set up SSL termination. And let's proceed with populating the 3 node details for automation here. All right. And so we can leave the default for the K8s cluster and service IP range. Normally that doesn't need to be changed. Most organizations don't actively utilize that range, but if you do need to, you can of course click custom there, but we'll just leave the default for now and proceed to the summary page and just give a quick glance. Mostly I'm looking here at the node fully qualified names and the IP addresses, kind of spot checking, making sure I didn't do any typos, and that all looks pretty good. So now we'll proceed to the install. And let's see how the comments are looking here. And don't forget Maher is taking a look at the comments and helping out. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them. All right, so cool. Our easy installers are progressing along here. We've gotten our binaries moved on over, and the easy installer is checking to see that the service has been started. Whoops. back to that. Cool. So let's go ahead and launch that. All right, great. So let's go ahead and go right into lifecycle operations here. Now on the dashboard, we can get a quick glance at everything that's going on in our environment. So let's take a look at the data centers. And here you can see that the default data center name and the default vCenter name. But our vCenter does have the green checks showing it's good and healthy and connected. So that's great. Let's take a look at the environments. Up top, we have the completed, in progress, failed, and deleted. And so since they're both in progress, let's go ahead and take a look at that. And we can see that both our global environment, which is what the identity manager environment is called, is in progress, and the Aria Suite environment with Aria automation is in progress as well. So let's take a look at those requests and look at the identity manager here. Looks like that's chugging along. It's waiting for a first root to get completed. And Aria automation is deploying its OVF. And you'll notice there's 3 lines here. And so there's 3 lines because we're deploying 3 nodes. And the top node in both this and identity manager will be the primary node. And so that's why the top line has quite a few more activities. You don't see the bottom 2 lines all the time. But since it is a 3-node cluster, when we perform actions on the second and third nodes, you'll see those lines there. And so I wanted to pause at this stage 8 for a moment here and just kind of point out that at this particular stage, it may take a bit longer because during that wave period there in the middle is when Aria automation is getting initialized. So that's when the Kubernetes containers are getting started. It's doing all its startup checks and getting all of its services running. So that particular stage can take a little bit longer. So if it's there for a little bit longer than the others than you expected, don't worry, it's fine. And just give it a moment and it'll complete its deployment. So let's keep looking down at the other stages we have. So there's quite a bit of work that goes on here behind the scenes, apart from just deploying. Make sure it registers with Identity Manager and shares the login tokens and does all of that integration for us. All right. So back to the easy installer. It should hopefully finish up with the IDM request. All right, great. So at this point, we've completed the vIDM installation along with the Aria automation installation. And as you can see, we have Lifecycle up and running. And so let's go ahead and click this link into vIDM 01 and confirm our configuration admin account is working as expected. All right. Great. We got logged in. We can see our products in the catalog here. And so since Aria automation also completed its deployment, let's go ahead and click open on that file. And great. We got that completely up and running. All right. So now our next step here is we want to apply the certificates we requested from our certificate authority to our IDM instance, so we can plan to scale it out to a 3-node cluster since it's just 1 node right now. And while I was at it, I also had the admin generate a wildcard for the environment because, well, they're generally quite useful to have around for testing and other purposes. So I'll go ahead and run through the process of using OpenSSL here to convert those PFX files to PEM certificates. And then I'll show you how to copy those PEM certificates and import them into the locker. So, all right, make this bigger there and update my command. Cool. So with that command, we've now converted our PFX into the PEM format there you see with the vIDM underscore PEM underscore cert.pem. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and do the wildcard as well. And then we'll take a look at the vIDM certificate here in its formatting. All right. So up at the top here from the OpenSSL conversion, we've got what's called the bag and key attributes. And essentially this is mostly, you can consider it like metadata. It's describing the certificate that's below it. And so we can ignore it for the most part. The LCM locker import process doesn't mind it being there either. It's mostly just focused on the beginning and end certificate lines. And so let's go ahead and just start with copying the private key, and we'll begin importing our Active Directory CA signed certificate into the locker. Let's go ahead and do this. All right. Go insert, paste this. Let's go get the rest of the certificate chain. Like I said, having the attributes in there is fine. Go ahead and paste that in, and we can import cert. Cool. Let's go ahead and do the wildcard as well, just so we can have it ready in the future if we need it. And we'll do the same process. Take a look at the cert here. Copy the PEM. And then copy the chain below it. All right, so we got the wildcard certificate pasted in here, and let's go ahead and import that. And with that, we'll be able to begin replacing the certificate in the global environment for Identity Manager in order to prepare it for scaling out to that 3-node cluster. So let's go ahead and do that and go back. Lifecycle operations. All right. So yeah, so here we can see we only have the singular DNS name. And so if we were to try to scale this out to a 3-node cluster, it wouldn't work very well because, well, it only has that one name in the certificate file there. So the first step to the scale out is really we need to update the certificate and ensure it has not only the 3 node names, but also the load balancer's fully qualified name in the subject alternative names field here. So let's go ahead and next select our vIDM cert. And here you can see we have all 3 node names along with the load balancer. And we always want to opt in for a snapshot, especially if you've been running an environment or a product for a long time. It's always a good little safety net. Not a backup, but a good safety net. All right, cool. And we got our pre-check done here. And let's go ahead and accept that. We understand we'll be shutting down to take the snapshots, and we'll go ahead and proceed. All right, and so now this is the request flow to replace the certificate on Identity Manager, including taking snapshots and cleaning those up upon successful application. So we'll watch this flow here for a moment, and let's see if there's any comments going on that we need addressing. All right, everything looks good. And so with the certificate completely applied, delete the node snapshots. And since Identity Manager and Aria Automation are tightly coupled, we need to let Aria Automation know that our thumbprint on our certificate has changed. And so we've done that there. Now let's take a look at the host and just kind of verify the cert that we expect to be here is applied successfully. So we'll do that a few ways. We'll come in here, take a look at the SAN field that we were talking about earlier. And we can see that we have all 3 node names along with the load balance host name added there. And so now vIDM node 01 is ready to be scaled out to a 3-node cluster. But first, let's take a look and make sure the load balancer is configured also with the correct certificate chain like we have here, where we see the DC01 certificate authority followed by our server certificate. So let's take a look at that here. Restart our session. So for this, we'll use OpenSSL S-Client Connect. It's a really super handy command I use quite often. It gives quite a bit of details about your certificate and certificate chain. All right, here we are. So here we can see the depth of the certificate is 1, and that's where our root certificate is. And so if we had an intermediate cert, that depth would be 2, with the intermediate cert being number 1 and the root being the last is number 2. And so when we're verifying our certificate chain, we want to make sure that between cert 0 and 1 and 1 and 2, if there is an intermediate, that the subject and issuer between the 2 are matching, right? So the issuer of our server certificate should be the subject of the certificate below it, and so on and so forth. So like I said before, you could have multiple intermediate certs, and so you could have a chain of 4 where cert 1 and 2 are intermediates kind of thing. And so, yep, I just wanted to touch on that. So our load balancer team has set up the load balanced host name properly with our certificate. We see the chain being presented as we expect. And furthermore, we can just take a double check at the end of the server certificate. We see we have HGBE there. And we can go back and check on the PFX file we converted to PEM and just see, hey, look, they match. Great. Everyone is in agreement. We have our certs applied to our load balancer, fine. It's applied to our host, fine. And yeah, we're about ready to scale out here. So let's clean this up a bit. All right, and since we just did the certificate update, I'm going to skip the trigger inventory sync. Otherwise, I would definitely recommend doing that. That is an important step to do, especially if you haven't just done it. So let's go ahead and proceed here. And I'll quickly set up the networking and resource information here. All right. So here we see the red node to add a component for scale out. And so to do that, we'll select the plus button next to components and select the secondary node. And we'll do this twice to add the 2 additional nodes to the cluster. And so once, and now it says invalid node count. We need 1 more. Just going to do this once more. All right, now it tells us to fill in the nodes with the proper details. So first off, let's begin filling in the FQDN for the clustered VIP. And then next, we need a IP for our Postgres database. This is different than the load balancer IP, and this is doesn't need to have a DNS name either. This is just merely an IP for internal database communication. So go ahead and enter an IP at the end of the node range and fill in these node details. All right, last IP, cool. And that's all the current nodes info. So let's go ahead and proceed. And we've pretty much covered all these manual pre-checks with what we've been talking about so far. So we're good to check I've taken care of these, and let's proceed with the pre-check. All right. Great, we've passed all of our pre-checks. Let's just, again, review the summary, make sure those node details are correct. It's easier to double check now than to redo it later. All right, those are all looking great. Let's go ahead and submit our request. Cool. And we'll, again, go through that similar process we saw in the certificate update flow, and it'll do the same shutdown and cleanly stop all the services and take snapshots as needed. So, how are the questions and comments doing? If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop a comment and we'll get to them. And here, like the Aria automation flow, we can see the additional nodes there down below. All right, so now Identity Manager updated its FQDN, indicating that it successfully trusted the certificate and was able to connect through the load balanced host name there. So we've completed most of the work here, and now we're going to go ahead and start the services and begin the Postgres clustering. It shouldn't be too much longer here. All right, looks like we're on our final reboot here. All right, we got the deployment completed. Let's go ahead and browse to the load balanced host name here. All right, great. Let's log in with our config admin account. All right, looks like the load balancer is working well. And we can get into our Aria automation cluster. And so, great, we now have a complete deployment of the VMware Aria Suite Lifecycle, vIDM, and VMware Aria Automation. Maybe as the next step, we could proceed with applying that wildcard certificate we imported earlier to Aria Suite Lifecycle, so it has a CA signed certificate applied to it. But for now, we've completed the demo, and we have a fully clustered deployed environment. So let me go ahead and switch back to our PowerPoint. And so, yeah, now you know how to plan for a successful deployment, leverage the easy installer to complete your deployment successfully, check through those forward and reverse DNS records. It's so easy to find a stale one. It happens all the time. You now know how to manage your certificates in your locker, converting those PFX certs from Active Directory certificate authorities or just importing your PEM certificates directly. And you also now know how to confirm the certificate chains applied to your load balancers. And so with that, I want to invite you to join us for our next session on the 13th with Tim George for getting started to maximize your value with VMware Aria Operations. And he'll show you the key features and capabilities of Aria Operations on the first day of installation. And so don't miss that session. It's going to be great. He's a good presenter. And again, on the 22nd, my colleagues Brandon Gordon and Nico Guerrero will be doing getting started for gaining insights into your capacity, making sure you don't run out of capacity, knowing how many VMs you can provision in your cluster, or if that upcoming project is going to fit in your current deployment. And so definitely join that session and see how to solve all these issues. And then to get some more content, go ahead and take a picture of that QR code, and that'll get you into our tech zone. And along with that, there's some good labs in the hands-on labs, and our YouTube channel at VMware Aria Cloud Management always has great content, always getting that updated. And our blog site at blogs.vmware.com/management. You can check out my blogs and blogs from the rest of the team. And finally, even though this is a streaming event, I still want to engage and offer some swag and give you some way to get some experiences. So I'll leave this slide up for a minute and take a picture of that QR code along with the question and answer Harmony. And you can check that out and get some swag. So with that, if there are any questions, we'll just make sure those are done. And all right, looks like we're cleared out on the questions. Thanks, Meher. And thank you, everyone, for attending my event.